evening and welcome to the Strand. I'm Christina Foxley, the Director of Events, and I'm so pleased to welcome Greil Marcus, Stephen Hazan-Arnoff, and Matthew Friedberger of the Fiery Furnaces, here tonight to celebrate Bob Dylan by Greil Marcus, writings 1968 to 2010. The dozens of pieces collected in this book comprise a portrait of how, throughout his career, Bob Dylan has drawn upon and reinvented the landscape of traditional American song, its myths and choruses, heroes and villains. They are the result of a more than 40-year engagement between an unparalleled singer and a uniquely acute listener. Greil Marcus is the author of When That Rough God Goes Riding, Like a Rolling Stone, The Old Weird America, The Shape of Things to Come, Mystery Train, Dead Elvis, In the Fascist Bathroom, and other books, including a 20th anniversary edition of Liptrick Traces, which was published last year. Since 2000, he has taught at Princeton, Berkeley, Minnesota, and is currently teaching around the corner at the New School. His column, Real Life Rock Top 10, appears regularly in The Believer. Joining Greil on the Strand stage tonight is Stephen Hazan-Arnoff, director of the 14th Street Y, which is hosting a weekend of events celebrating Bob Dylan and the band. I'll let Stephen speak more about the Dylan weekend and introduce this evening's musical accompaniment in a moment. Kara is in the back selling tickets to this weekend's festivities. I believe they're offering Strand customers a special discount, so make sure you visit with Kara after this. Following tonight's discussion, Stephen and Greil would be happy to take your questions. Greil will then sign copies of his book for you, which you can purchase downstairs on your way out of the store. Please join me in welcoming Greil Marcus, Stephen Hazan-Arnoff, and Matthew Friedberger to the Strand.
Thank you all for being here. I'm Stephen Hazan-Arnoff, Executive Director of the 14th Street Y. We're delighted to be celebrating the publication of Greil's new book, and also delighted to be sharing with you a preview of What Kind of Love Is This? A celebration of Bob Dylan and the band. Includes a gallery exhibition, symposium, and all-star concert this Sunday, December 5th. The information appears behind me and around me. It's really a stellar collection of artists, thinkers, musicians, and more, celebrating the work of one of rock's most bewitching combinations. And delighted that two of the members of presenters, performers, engagers of this content with us are here today to talk about Bob Dylan, the band, music criticism, whatever else we can explore in the next 35, 40 minutes or so, and questions from you. Actually I wanted to start with something, Matthew, that you had mentioned while we were chatting just before we began, which is that you are a part of a generation of musicians who not only grow up listening to rock, of course, but also reading rock. That part of the canon as a fan or a person experiencing rock and roll is actually also through the lens of criticism by people like Greil Marcus. So I wondered if you could reflect on that, and Greil, perhaps you could reflect on what it means to be a lens for musicians, to be thinking about the rock canon.
Yeah, when I was in junior high, as opposed to eating lunch, I'd go in the library, and they had the Rolling Stone, I think, illustrated history of rock and roll. There were so many of those things, and there was a Sex Pistols article. I think you wrote it. And later, it was a lot of it was, some of it in Liptrick Traces. And that had a big influence on it. And then and that was an activity you didn't think of it as an intellectual activity. I was going to the library, I was wasting time. And that was just that was a normal thing to do as a rock fan, was to look at pictures of rock bands. A good way to look at pictures of rock bands was to look in a book like that. Inevitably, you started reading the area that it commented. So, sorry, I'll talk more in the microphone. One's experience, my experience of the rock music, was filtered immediately, sometimes before hearing the music, by things like that. Reading that was a very formative experience for me, that particular thing. I also read the Dave Marsh Who book, Before I Get Old, and the Richard Barnes Who book, Maximum R&B, which were very, very different books. That was interesting, seeing people disagree. But I was a 9-year-old Who fan, so that's why I read those books. But so my experience of the Basement Tapes record, for instance, all Dylan is I didn't listen to it, make up my own mind, read the criticism, and see how and filter it through my own experience. The experience of it was with the criticism was already out there. I bought records with the Rolling Stone record guide. I didn't necessarily think it was right, but I used it because what else did you have to use? You had your friends who you didn't listen to because they're often quite stupid about music. As you would fight with them. I was saying to Greil before that the big experience of talking about music was fighting about this music. Pop music or rock music didn't bring me and my friends together. It separated us in a way that was often very constructive as a teenager. So I don't know what you think about that, if that's a question. I mean, it's no accident that you've liked some of my band's records, because you inevitably had to somehow inform the way they were made. Is that cheating then?
I mean, it never occurred to me when, on your first album, which when I reviewed it...
I don't want to make this about my band.
Well, I mean, your first album, the Fiery Furnace's first album, was Gallows Bird Bark, right? And when I reviewed it as Gallows Bird Park, because I thought, what is a Gallows? It didn't, when I read it, the B turned into a P. So that was my, terribly erudite review of your first album, getting the title wrong.
Creative misinterpretation.
But when I saw on that album a song by Doc Boggs, one of my musical heroes, a Virginia mountain banjo player who recorded in the 20s, a song called Old Rub Alcohol Blues. My reaction was another one, meaning another Doc Boggs fan. That to me is the thrill of making a connection through writing, through reading, through listening is finding affinities, finding other people out there who've stumbled on the same wonderful stones that you've tripped on. And that, that sense of people who care about someone from so far back, that's the thrill. The argument, when I was a lot younger, the arguments were friendly, and they all seemed to, create more energy. I'll never forget the day that Chuck Berry with School Day was challenging Elvis with All Shook Up for the #1 spot on the local charts in the San Francisco Bay Area. And everybody at school was going around and saying, "Who'd you vote for?" What do you mean, vote? Well, didn't you buy the record to keep it, to either get Elvis in or get Chuck Berry out or whichever it was? That was thrilling. That was my first election. But finding people, recognizing people, as I, sort of recognized you, I becoming a fan of your music because I was a fan of Doc Boggs. That was, nothing like it. As a writer, you don't think, at least I never have, that anybody is going to read what you write. You don't imagine what the person you're writing about is going to think of it, because you don't presume that that person is ever going to see it. You think, maybe a friend will see it and tell you, you really got it right. You couldn't have gotten it more wrong. It's always a surprise to me. It's never anything to anticipate.
Greil, thinking about Matt's first response and thinking about two descriptions of the period of Dylan and the band together. Obviously, you covered the breadth from 68 to 2010 in the work you published and the distance of Dylan's career. But focusing for a moment on Dylan and the band, two members of the band describe it quite differently. So Robbie Robertson shared an image with you that you shared in Invisible Republic, which was that Dylan was like a professor coming to teach. that there was actually a pedagogy there, that Dylan was sharing this world of music with these musicians. You mentioned earlier that Rick Danko described it as a kind of a clubhouse, a place for fun. So how do you sort of navigate those two experiences of there's a pedagogy, there's class, there's teaching, apropos Matthew's questions around how do you teach this, and Rick Danko's explanation of it being a place to cut loose and just have some fun?
Well, here they are. It's 1967. They're up in the Catskills. Dylan has been touring like a madman with the Hawks, who become the band. In 65 and 66, the concerts are becoming more and more like battles between the performers and the audience. It's becoming uglier and uglier, and there really is a specter of violence that is both coming from the crowd and that gets into the music and goes back at the crowd through the music. It's too much. And so, this is 1967. This is a time when it was believed that to maintain a career in pop music, you had to put out at least 3 albums a year. You had to tour constantly. You had to have a single every 3 or 4 months. Otherwise, you were going to be forgotten because the audience had no attention span. So, here, these people disappear. This is unheard of. Bob Dylan supposedly has this terrible motorcycle accident. There are rumors that he's dead, that he's being kept alive by artificial means in a secret hospital, that he's horribly disfigured and can never show his face again. All this kind of stuff is going on while Dylan and the band begin to get together every afternoon, first at his house, then at their house up near Woodstock, and begin to play songs. And they start out playing songs that are on the radio right then. They start out playing contemporary folk songs. And then, as Robbie Robertson described it, he said he wasn't obvious about it. We weren't supposed to know. But he was there to teach us. He was taking us to school. He said you could tell. He would come in and he prepared each afternoon with a series of songs he wanted them to learn. Not to learn the song so much, but to learn the language. In other words, as Robbie Robertson said, he was teaching us about folk music, about old American music. He said we were suspicious of this, Pete Seeger, all this stuff, which side are you on? He said that wasn't the train we came in on. That wasn't the train we wanted to ride. We didn't trust this kind of stuff at all. And so, what he said was if he had come in and said, look, there are serious gaps in your knowledge that I think it's incumbent upon me to do my best to fill in, that would never have worked. So, on the one hand, you've got a guy who's showing up with these other people every afternoon, fooling around, and yet he has something he wants to accomplish. And so do they. So does the band. So do Robbie Robertson and Rick Danko and Garth Hudson and Richard Manuel and Levon Helm, not there for most of the time. They want to find out how to make their own music. This is a band, this is a bunch of people who were a bar band starting in the late 50s. These are people who were musical professionals long before Bob Dylan was, even though, except for Garth Hudson, they were so much younger. They were a bar band. They had never played a show before they began playing with Bob Dylan where people bought tickets to see them. They were the noise. They were the entertainment. You went to the bar, you got drunk, and you listened to them. That's how it worked. They didn't write their own songs. And now, this whole world was opening up. But Rick Danko, the way he put it was, one afternoon, we were talking on the phone, and he said, it was just so wonderful. We would be together every afternoon. We played together